If you want to learn real history, real economics, and real political theory, then check out Liberty Classroom. Go to wakeupcallpodcast.com/liberty. That's wakeupcallpodcast.com/liberty to learn more. Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Call Podcast. Today we're speaking with Scott Horton about his book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. Scott is managing director of the Libertarian Institute and the host of the Scott Horton Show, which mostly focuses on topics related to foreign policy. He is also an assistant editor for antiwar.com. You can follow his work at libertarianinstitute.org, at scotthorton.org, and at antiwar.com. The website for his new book is foolserrand.us with no apostrophe. You can also find him on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. For more information, please see the show notes page for this episode at wakeupcallpodcast.com/Afghanistan. Scott, welcome back to the show.
Hey, happy to be here. How are you guys?
Yeah, we're doing well. Thank you so much for joining us again. So whenever we have you on, we always have a tough time keeping the time down because there's just so much interesting stuff to cover. And obviously that's not going to be any different with this book. So we'll see how we move through this thing. But there's obviously quite a bit to say. So let's just start out with an overview of your book, of Fool's Errand, and your motivation for writing the book.
So the overview of the book is that we didn't need to have the war in the first place. Well, really, that our government picked this fight for us in the first place. And then in reaction, they basically took advantage and did all the wrong things when they really didn't need to have a war at all. And then even if they needed to have a war at all, they sure didn't need to pick a fight with the insurgency that they ended up creating by attacking it. And at this point now, the insurgency cannot be defeated. Short of a campaign of genocidal annihilation or something against the civilian population there, which we cannot do. And which would be wrong. And so the point is that the war cannot be won. There is no better strategy that can be employed in order to achieve American goals there. And so the only answer is to quit it. And then my motivation for the thing is that I tried to start writing kind of a everyman's guide to all the wars and sort of debunking all the wars, or, all the terror wars, basically. And then the first section, Jimmy Carter through Bill Clinton, really was way too long to be a chapter 1 for this whole thing. And then I didn't know really what I was going to do with it except, find a way to pare it down later. And then I went ahead and moved on to chapter 2. And then chapter 2 became the Afghanistan book. Because I just got bogged down trying to tell the story of this 16-year war. And at some point, I guess once it was 50,000 words or something, I decided, all right, well, I don't know who I'm kidding. There's no point in writing this anymore if I'm just going to edit it all out again. And I'm not even halfway done yet. So I might as well just go ahead and admit it that I'm writing a book about Afghanistan. So I went ahead and committed to that once I was done with the first draft. Because I already knew what I want to say about it, more or less. So I pretty much wrote the thing going from memory and just from online sources that I all had in mind and books that I already had here that I had already read. And then I stopped and I read about 15 or so books about it. I spent about 6 weeks or something trying to get all those read, take a bunch of notes, and then went and revised it all. And then I kept updating it up until the point when Trump finally announced his escalation, his surge. And at that point, I went ahead and published it because that was where we were kind of all converging. I was getting finished with the book, and he was getting rolled by the generals right around the same time there.
Yeah, and let's get into
summer.
Yeah, and let's get into all of this, because although the war started in 2001, U.S. involvement in Afghanistan goes back even before that. So can you talk about U.S. involvement in Afghanistan pre-2001 and how the Soviet war in Afghanistan in the late 70s and into the 80s plays into this?
Yeah. All right. Now, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, and Robert Gates, who at the time was the number 2 at CIA, they claim credit for this, and I don't know how plausible it is really that they succeeded in their goal, but they at least claim that they were deliberately trying to lure the Soviet Union into invading Afghanistan by providing aid to the Mujahideen before the Soviet invasion, starting in the summer of 1979. They invaded in December, And these guys took credit for making it happen. Perhaps they would have invaded anyway because the Soviets were really unhappy with the government in Kabul at the time for being too communist, actually, and picking too many fights. But so in any case, they at least attempted, according to their version of the story, they were at least attempting to lure the Soviets into invading Afghanistan. And by their account, it worked. And then Ronald Reagan inherited the policy and continued it. And that was the CIA's Operation Cyclone to back not just the Afghan Mujahideen, but also the Saudis and the Pakistanis were helping to arrange the travel of Arabs and really Muslims from around the world to go there and help fight as well. And so out of that, I think people mostly know the story that it worked, right? They did bog down the Soviet Union. They finally withdrew in humiliating defeat in 1989, and the Soviet Union itself fell apart shortly thereafter. And, you know, the Ronald Reagan Republicans, they took credit for it themselves. Zbigniew Brzezinski as well took credit for it and said, hey, what's more important? Some stirred up Muslims or the fall of the Soviet Union? Orrin Hatch, the Republican senator from Utah, also said, hey, listen, you know, yeah, you're right that we have a problem with these Mujahideen guys now, but can't underestimate just what a big deal it was that we got rid of the USSR, right? It was a means to an end to accomplish that. That was their reasoning. And then what happened was, after the Soviet Union was gone, the Americans expanded their empire rather than retreating, since the excuse for their empire had evaporated. Rather than abolishing NATO and coming home, they went and found further excuses for intervention. And of course, namely Iraq War I. Then in the aftermath of Iraq War I, Bush Sr. urged the Shiite supermajority population of 60% and their friends, the Iraqi Kurds, who are another 20%, to rise up against the Sunni Ba'athist dominated dictatorship there. But then at the last minute, they changed their mind and stabbed them in the back and left them high and dry and let Saddam massacre them all. Well, then that became the excuse to stay in Iraq for another decade in order to enforce the no-fly zones and the blockade against Saddam Hussein from those bases in Saudi Arabia. And that's what turned the Mujahideen that America had supported in Afghanistan, and particularly the Arab Afghans, really not the actual Afghans, but the so-called Arab Afghan Mujahideen fighters. That's what turned them against the United States. And their doctrine was they'd like to someday create a caliphate in their wildest dreams, but there's no way to do that as long as the Americans are around. You can't overthrow the king of Saudi Arabia. You can't overthrow Saddam. You can't overthrow anybody and have your own way until the Americans are no longer the 800-pound gorilla that'll come and back them up. So they decided they had to attack us first. And so the strategy was to lure us into a full-scale commitment to land war in the Middle East until our country and our military were broke and bankrupt. And then at that point, just like the Soviet Union, they would force a real and full-scale withdrawal, and then they would be able to have their way. In fact, kind of a postscript to that, if you fast forward through the Afghan War and Iraq War II and get to Iraq War III, George Bush first, and then especially Barack Obama, they actually helped to create the Islamic State. Bush, by giving all of Western Iraq to the bin Ladenites, to the new Jihadistan in Sunnistan in Western Iraq after the fall of the Baathists there, while turning the east of the country over to the Iranian-backed Shiites. But then also especially Obama for backing the jihadis, and all of our allies' effort to back the jihadis in Syria is what ended up blowing back into the creation of the Islamic State in 2014. And then what happened? They called it the Caliphate, not just the Islamic State, the Caliphate, with the Caliph Ibrahim is what their leaders started calling himself, and all of this. And then what happened? America came and bombed them off the face of the earth, just like Al-Qaeda always said that they would if they ever tried to do that. This is why Zawahiri tried to tell Baghdadi, no, don't do it. Stay in Syria and just keep fighting. And he said, screw you, Zawahiri. You know, you gave your orders. Now let's see you enforce them from the basement in Pakistan where you're hiding, pal. And he went ahead and he broke from Al-Qaeda and he created his caliphate. And then America came and proved Zawahiri right, that until the Americans are no longer in the picture, they won't be able to have their way. So this just So Bush and Obama have increased these guys' numbers from 400 to about 40,000. And then they've just proved Al-Qaeda's original strategy correct, that you have to keep attacking the Americans until they finally piss all the way off. Because after all, we're the North Americans. We cannot, never mind, we don't have the right to, we cannot be the dominant power in the Middle East, in Eurasia forever. It's just not in the cards. We can't afford it. Even this most wealthy society in the world cannot afford world empire. Not forever, we can't. So that's their thing. They're playing the long game. Go ahead with the September 11th attack. Give the Americans an excuse to double, triple, quadruple down. And then that's what the Americans did. They didn't just invade Afghanistan, but they invaded Iraq. They started a war. They've increased the size of Al-Qaeda by 1,000% down in Yemen. They took a group of nobodies, the very smallest, most inconsequential part of the Islamic Courts Union, Al-Shabaab, back in 2006, and they turned them into a full-fledged Al-Qaeda affiliate in Somalia. They've created chaos in Libya, where Islamic State and Al-Qaeda fighters are competing for dominance there. There's enough of them for that now in Libya, in the center of North Africa. Those consequences have actually spread on down to Mali and even into Sierra Leone from the Libya War of 2011. And then, of course, with the Syria disaster. So when Michael Scheuer, the former chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit, said that Afghanistan was what bin Laden was trying to do, the Iraq War was the hoped for but unexpected gift to bin Laden. That was just the bonus that, he could never have counted on, but only, hoped that Bush would want to go and finish his father's so-called, half-finished job against Saddam Hussein. But then what did Obama do? Oh, and also Bush did Somalia. But then Obama full-fledged spread the war to Yemen, Libya, and Syria. And at this point, I'm a reverse 9/11 truther, where I think instead Al-Qaeda works for the CIA, I think the CIA works for Al-Qaeda. And I think Bush and Obama are both agents of Ayman al-Zawahiri under somehow his secret spell, as America continues to accomplish every single thing that Al-Qaeda would have them do. Actually, that's not true. They backed down on completely regime changing Assad in Damascus. I think they realized that, man, we really could have al-Jilani, who is the deputy of Zawahiri, literally ruling Damascus. And since Zawahiri's the butcher of New York City, that would kind of be bad PR for the American people once it finally became clear who had put him there. As long as they could say, oh, mythical moderates, this and that, we're helping the moderates, that's one thing. But once they put Jilani in the chair in Damascus, that's probably a bridge too far, I think they decided. So that's one place where they backed down.
So post 9/11, what was the atmosphere and what was the opinion of folks at home about the war in Afghanistan, and what were the stated goals of the war, and how did the opinion of the war in Afghanistan and the stated goals of the war change over time?
Well, that's a good question. I think right away the American people were perfectly happy to see an attack. Bush only gave the most half-hearted efforts at negotiating, really no efforts. He said, here's our negotiation, hand them over or else we'll kill you. And so when they said, well, we'd like to see some evidence first, we'd like to turn them over to a third country first, and this kind of thing, that was interpreted, I think, quite dishonestly as, see, they're completely intransigent, they're stalling for time, they refuse to cooperate. And, the American people kind of had a point that actually we don't want to hear any arguments, hand them over. And really, as I say in the book, the Taliban really screwed up by not just going ahead and dropping off bin Laden and them at the nearest CIA station. They were fools to want to debate about it. And yet, as soon as the bombs started falling, the Taliban dropped all their conditions, and negotiating with the CIA in Pakistan told them, we will turn him over to any third country, and without seeing any evidence of his guilt. And by him, I believe that is, meant to include Zawahiri and the whole gang of whoever are the Arabs traveling with bin Laden are considered, part of the group. And they said that, once the bomb started falling, they said, all right, we'll hand him over to any third country, which in theory could have been Canada or Mexico or the UK. Even before that, they said, we'll hand him over to a Muslim country. Well, that could have been Malaysia or Jordan or Egypt or any country that would have extradited him to the U.S. immediately. In fact, if they had asked Hosni Mubarak to just bury the guy alive, he would have done that, right? But the American government was, very happy to conflate Al-Qaeda and the Taliban together and act as though the Taliban had waged this attack on us or had hosted Al-Qaeda for the purposes of Al-Qaeda being able to attack us this way and that kind of thing, which was just absolutely not true. The Taliban regime was basically stuck with bin Laden. As Mullah Omar put it to UPI, Arnaud Deborgrave, the reporter for United Press International, just a couple of months before the attack, he said, bin Laden is like a chicken bone in my throat. I can neither swallow him nor spit him out. What am I supposed to do? I'm kind of stuck with this guy. I got to protect him, etc. And he was really looking for ways, as the CIA officers have even explained in the Washington Post and so forth. The Taliban were looking for ways that they could get rid of this guy. And they had to be able to save some face. It's a very important part of their customs, especially, among all Afghans, but especially among the Pashtuns. They have what's called the Pashtun Wali Code that holds the protection of guests and those seeking shelter as the single highest kind of commitment and priority, where allegedly, anyway, people are bound to give up their son before they give up a guest to someone coming and, demanding that they be turned over, that kind of thing. So in the face of that, they had their qualifications, and the Americans went ahead and they wanted war. And they really did not want to solve the problem quickly. They wanted to take advantage. And they made that clear. George W. Bush made that clear in his speech that night, that, the translation was obvious. Now's my chance to get away with blue bloody murder. Me and my regime, we're going to do whatever we want by exploiting your sadness and sympathy, and by, using a bait and switch. Even that night and later, a week later, 5 days later, when he spoke to Congress, he didn't say Al-Qaeda. He said, our war is against terrorism, the tactic of any number of groups all around the world, which was such an obvious bait and switch. If anyone wanted to be critical at the time and say, hey, wait, I don't feel like falling for this right now, it's pretty transparent that, well, wait a minute. Why isn't the war called the War on Al-Qaeda? Why didn't they call it that? They called it that because they're going to get away with blue bloody murder. That's why. Because they're going to scare your mom into saying, okay, if you say you got to attack Iraq to keep me safe, I guess it's all right then. Orange alert, everybody, orange alert. And they moved to exploit it. So they wanted, and I make the case in the book, I think fairly well, that they did not commit. It's not that they didn't try at all to kill bin Laden, but they absolutely did not commit the resources necessary that were available and necessary to stop bin Laden from escaping into Pakistan. And then once he escaped, they refused to chase him across the border into a friendly country where they already had permission to go from the central government there. And that was because they wanted war. They wanted regime change in Kabul and to create a new government for Afghanistan. And then they wanted to be able to pretend that Saddam Hussein was friends with Osama bin Laden, and that the threat from Saddam had changed from, well, geez, we think it's possible that he might be able to restart a chemical weapons program. Shrug, so what? Right? To now, he could give these weapons of mass destruction to Al-Qaeda terrorists to use against us, which he had, of course, absolutely no motivation to do whatsoever. And they knew that, and he had no real connection to them whatsoever. We now know it's an absolutely established fact. The CIA reported to George Bush's government within 2-3 days after the attack. They had reviewed everything, and they found no legitimate connections between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. And Bush just told them, oh, yeah, screw you, keep looking. That was it. They were going to frame Saddam Hussein for this thing, hell or high water. And so they had the fake stories about Iraqi intelligence gave anthrax to, well, first of all, just met with Mohammed Atta in Prague. And then in the London Times, Israeli intelligence added that he had given him anthrax. But mostly, Cheney used that one, and the neocons in the media used that a lot and tried to pretend that Saddam was really that close with Saddam, that maybe he had even done the attack. But Bush and Rice and Powell and Tenet and all of the real leaders of the Bush government, they were more careful than that. They never actually accused bin Laden of doing it. but they were always very, very happy to leave you the impression that that's what they meant. And I think it was quite deliberate because it happened over and over again. When George Bush would be asked, but why do we have to attack Iraq? Why now? And he would say, why do we have to attack Iraq? Because of September 11th.
All right, so
because that's the day we learned that from now on we have to start all the wars rather than waiting around for someone to attack us first. Right? But in the meantime, in that giant pregnant pause, it sounded like, and this is the nitwit idiot president who doesn't know how to speak English anyway, right? So you start doing him a favor, not to sound too ableist. You start doing him a favor and saying, oh, what the dumb ass was trying to say was that Saddam did it. Why do we have to attack Saddam? Because of September 11th. Because Saddam did September 11th. That's what he means, right? That's what it sounds like he means. And then 7 seconds later or more, he goes, because we adopted a new doctrine that day that anyone who could ever threaten us must be confronted first. When, of course, Saddam had never threatened us at all. And people say, well, he was pretending he had weapons of mass destruction. Well, no, he wasn't. He turned over a 12,000-page dossier to the UN. It was this complete mea culpa. Yeah, I used to have chemical weapons. They've all been completely destroyed since 1991. Leave me alone. And it was all there. So, but that's why they deliberately lied. I mean, Bush in his initial statement said these terrorists exist in 60 countries, and we will have to confront them in 60 countries. They're just writing them a blank check to attack whoever they wanted, do whatever they wanted.
All right, now you've already mentioned the Taliban and the Pashtuns, but of course there are other groups a part of this conflict, this war in Afghanistan. We've heard about the Northern Alliance, the Tajiks, and then you hear about some of the leaders like Hamid Karzai and Mullah Omar. So can you get into just who's who and where they're from and who's on what side and who all the leaders are?
Well, it's kind of a pain, right? But I guess so. If you picture Afghanistan, it's about the size of Texas. It's really a big country. It's landlocked in Central Asia there. It's to the northeast of Iran, i.e. Persia. It's, Pakistan is sort of shaped like backwards capital L, roughly speaking. And so Afghanistan then fits in that bend there. So the Pakistani border goes from Iran all the way up to China in the east of Afghanistan. And then they have Iran in their west, and then to the north is Uzbekistan, and the rest of the Central Asian stands there. So in the very north of the country is where you have the ethnic groupings that are the minority coalition that used to make up the Northern Alliance that now make up the Kabul government backed by the U.S. And those are, you mentioned, the Tajiks, the Hazaras, the Uzbeks, and then to a lesser degree, I guess, the Turkmen and some Sikhs and whatever other ethnic and religious minority groups up there. And then this is a bit of an oversimplification, although I can get into the more complicated details of it. But more or less, the mission of the Americans is to foist this coalition government of these small minority groups onto the plurality population of the country, the Pashtuns, who are approximately 40% of the country. So they're not the majority, but they're certainly the largest minority group in a country of minority groups. So, well, it's just not going to work. And I mean, these peoples are very geographically divided from each other. The Pashtuns actually have some population up in the north, but you don't really have any Uzbeks, Tajiks, and Hazaras and those living down in the south and in the east of the country at all. That's really Afghan Pashtunistan, south of the mountains in the east there. And, well, and I guess including the mountains and south of them all the way down. So they like to fight, and they will fight. And in fact, I think it's fair to say, because it comes, from good sources, that for them, fighting against foreigners, trying to dominate them, is actually at the center of their entire culture. And this is what makes them them, is that someone is always trying to invade them, and they're always happy to shoot at those who would try to invade them. And that's it. And as Eric Margulies has said, they'll fight for 2 centuries. If you think that they're going to give in, you're wrong. They will fight for 2 centuries, and then after we leave in 2 centuries, then they'll go back to fighting amongst each other, because that's what they like to do, and that's basically the deal. And I don't want to sound like too Orientalist about it or whatever, but that's their culture. It's an ancient tribal warrior culture, and for that matter, if we wanted to deliver them actual enlightenment and civilization, we've done nothing but turn their country upside down for now going on 40 years straight. So it's not surprising that, the more violent ideas would be the ones dominating. And the Americans act like, and maybe to a great degree, they really don't know what the hell they're doing. I mean, on one hand, Hamid Karzai himself was a Pashtun and the son of a prominent warlord from Kandahar province. And so he had some legitimacy as a president. In a sense, at least at first, the Taliban accepted the new government and didn't declare, oh, we'll fight forever to get our power back. They said, fine, he's a Muslim, he's a Pashtun, he's from Kandahar, he's the son of Karzai, so he's fine, or, good enough. But the Americans ended up basically just looking for people to fight. And when they sided with the government, they sided against the new government's old enemies. And so they side with this warlord. That's not just the government in Kabul, but they side with this governor of this province and this mayor of this district. Then they sign up the enemies of this governor and this mayor to be their enemies too. And this is just carried on over and over and over throughout the occupation. And they just continue making the insurgency worse and worse and worse. And so at this point in Pashtunistan, there's just really no question. Even according to General Petraeus himself, conceded that the Taliban's government, they're really not just an insurgency. They are now, again, a shadow government and the only real government in operation in much of the country. And they have their own court system with their own criminal and civil dispute resolution systems, which, of course, reflect the desires of the local population. The Americans are coming in and saying, here's how we do democracy in Denton, Texas, or whatever, and they're not impressed. They already have their own traditions and their own, loya jirgas and their own court systems and what have you. And as always, the Taliban are harsh as hell, but fair. They're not just completely criminal and completely biased and just here to loot you on the side of the road. They're here to provide law and order or else. And they're very severe, but they are, in a sense, honest in that way, as compared to the criminal warlords and heroin dealers and child rapists and murderers, just gangsters, scumbags that America has chosen to be their leaders instead. And so the insurgency thrives and the American project continues to fail.
If you want to win debates and be able to better argue free market ideas, check out Liberty Classroom. For a mere 24 cents a day, which is less than $8 a month, you can learn real history, real economics, and real political theory. Go to wakeupcallpodcast.com/liberty. That's wakeupcallpodcast.com/liberty to learn more and to become a more effective debater.
What's some of the destruction that's been created by the war? And what are some, and I don't really like using the word war crimes, especially because any war that's completely, offensive and it's an invasion, that war in itself is a crime. So I think using the word war crimes is kind of silly when the whole war is a crime. But what war crimes have been committed?
Well, I mean, it's been just horrible. First of all, the American costs are about $1 trillion so far, more. 2,400 dead, tens of thousands wounded. And, costs into the future unending. And of course, we're staying. So we're just right in the middle of this conversation at this point. For the Afghan people, I mean, it depends. There's some who have benefited, I'm sure, depending on, how close you are to a warlord that's been close with the American government, or maybe how remote they've been from those who would give them trouble for at least the time being. But overall, I don't think there's any question that at least 100,000 people have been killed, maybe quite a bit more. It's very difficult for people to do, quote unquote scientific, social science type best effort surveys to figure out excess death rates and violent deaths, because there's just no, modern reporting system for these kinds of truths in Afghanistan. The security situation does not allow for people to go around doing these kinds of surveys. The journalism just isn't there. The civil society isn't there. So there's a lot of gaps to be filled in. But I mean, there's absolutely no question that innocent people, men, people always exclude the men, they're fighting age males, they're bad guys. Well, they killed, a bunch of guys, but, some of them were women and children. Well, the men, too, are just innocent people who've had their country invaded. I'm a man, and it doesn't make it okay to murder me. I mean, it'd be worse to kill my wife, I guess, but still, it doesn't make it all right to kill me. I don't know. Isn't that how you guys feel about that? Anyway, so they've been at war with, even those who carry rifles, they're still civilians who've been, forced into a situation of defending their country from foreign invasion, and that's the fact of it. And tens of thousands of them have been shot, blown apart, tortured, beaten, humiliated in front of their families, had their houses raided in the middle of the night, suffered, legendary brutality that'll go down in world history for the torture of the Bush regime, of the people, especially the people of Afghanistan in the very early part of the war there, and the things that they did to people. It's been an absolute nightmare. And then their strategy supposedly always is winning over the Afghan people to believe that somehow we care more about them than they care about themselves, and that no matter how bad they resist, we will continue to insist to stay to help them, no matter how many of them we have to kill. And the whole thing is absurd, to pretend that the Americans are the benefactors of the Afghan people. They might do a photo op at one school, but they don't show you the other one. Overall, the entire war is a fraud. In fact, they dropped the pretense of building a nation and schools for girls and all this quite a long time ago now. The mission is simply to stay and keep fighting. In other words, there's no real pretension that they're going to ever win. It's just like when Obama said that he launched the Libya war on a 51-49 decision. Like, that's it. He's admitting it was a war crime. That he started a war based on a barely, not really the flip of a coin, but if he had to quantify his feeling about it, it was a 51-49 decision. Well, it's the same thing here. They admit, they know they can't win this war. They have no strategy to win the war. They're going to ask the Pakistanis to please stop backing the Afghan Taliban, even though, of course, they're not going to do that. I don't know if you guys saw this, but a reporter asked James Mattis just the other day, James Mattis, what are the metrics, in the military news speak, what are the metrics for measuring success in Afghanistan? They don't ever say victory, just success. But anyway, so what are the metrics for that? Now, they've already announced the strategy, and they've already announced the surge. They're sending 4,000 men. They already have started sending, Marines to Helmand before that. So they asked Mattis, so what are the metrics for determining success? And Mattis said, I don't know. But you know what? I'm going to go to Brussels, and I'm going to meet with some of my NATO friends, and we're going to talk about that. Maybe we'll hold a little committee meeting or something and see if we can't come up with a little something there for you. In other words, the mission is just keep fighting. The mission is they can't run us out of there. They can't defeat the Bagram Air Base and drive the Americans out or kill every last one of us or something like that. That ain't going to happen. As long as America stays, they don't ever completely lose. And so they stay. That's it. And they know it. Yeah. Just like I say when I quote Petraeus saying, oh, yeah, no, the people love the Taliban and hate our guts. Well, so then, but your mission is to protect them from the Taliban by killing them and the Taliban. They admit that what they're doing doesn't make sense. They admit that what they're doing, McMaster has said, his is a 4-year plan. And at the end of another 4 years, and notice this 4-year plan is kicking in halfway through the first year of a 4-year term, right? And then this 4-year plan includes at the end, then we'll think about possibly maybe beginning to try to open negotiations with the Taliban, which, of course, you and I know the Americans are never going to agree to a deal with the Taliban where they give them their country, right?
Yeah.
So they just keep fighting. That's it. Otherwise, it's lose. And the last president who lost a war like this was Richard Nixon. And the only thing, and look at what he did to his only political cover for pulling the troops out was basically carpet bombing North Vietnam off the face of the earth. We're lucky looking back on it that he didn't use atom bombs. And that was his cover for pulling the troops out and ending the war, was launching a virtually genocidal air war in the north of the country. And then, hey, look, the war's over. The troops are out, and let's go ahead and pull the last few, and then there we go. But can you imagine a current circumstance like that, where an American president, even Donald Trump, I guess I can. I argued in the book that he had a chance here to say these generals are a bunch of weak, idiot, loser, dopey fools like John McCain, and screw them. Just because George Bush or Barack Obama said we have to protect the government in Kabul forever doesn't mean I have to. They don't speak for America, not anymore. They're the ones who drove this thing into a ditch. That's how he got elected in the first place. Is, just how hard is it, guys, to point your finger at the Clintons and the Bushes? And Obama, of course, is nothing but a Clinton. Point your fingers at these guys. Say, look, they ruined everything. We're going to put them on an ice floe and send them out to sea, and we're going to have a brand new clean break and a brand new policy that includes getting the hell out of Afghanistan, because what the hell are we still doing there? And we know he knows better, but he did the wrong thing anyway, because politically it's better for him to just go ahead and give in, to shut up Lindsey Graham and John McCain and to shut up the generals.
Yeah. So just how strong is the Taliban in Afghanistan right now? And is this war ever going to end, at least the U.S. involvement in it? Is there any chance of that happening?
Well, the first part is they rule about, 40-something% of the country in the daytime and more at night. They don't hold cities. They don't, conquer cities and hold them. Small villages, yeah, but they don't really have any fixed positions to bomb anywhere. They call themselves the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, but they don't really have a group of institutions that could be targeted. They're still an insurgency for now, but they rule Pashtunistan. And that includes up in the north where you have Pashtun populations like up in Kunduz. That's enough of a toehold for the Taliban to continue to attack up in Kunduz. And even they have seized the country for a couple of weeks at a time. And I think they always deliberately melt away. Like, they seize the city long enough to loot what they can and then run, kind of thing. Because the Americans are still there. And they'd be fools to go up, head to head against the American Green Berets. They will put fire on targets. So as an insurgency, they just continue to move. And then will the war end? No. Bob Corker said today, the senator said today, we're going to be there at least another 10 years. And I think that's right. Because really the only way that would not be true is if Donald Trump had the slightest shred of decency in his body whatsoever. And he's a bad person. He doesn't have the vision. He doesn't have the motive to push back against this. For years he said that this is horrible. We got to get out. He beat Obama over the head of it 100 times. He certainly convinced himself that he was right. In fact, at one point, when Obama was saying, screw you, generals, we're getting out by the, drawing down the surge anyway, by the end of 2012, just like in the deal, and we're sticking to it, and I'm holding you to it. And they were pushing back and saying, no, we want to stay. And Obama said no. And Donald Trump started tweeting out, I support President Obama on this. Tell those generals to shut up, man. I don't know. I might be going off the reservation on my paraphrase there, but I support Obama on this. He's right. The generals are wrong. We got to get out of Afghanistan. It was something like that. So he believed it. He convinced himself enough that he even at one point took Obama's side in saying enough is enough. We got to get out of there. When Obama was sort of saying that, not that he was ever really doing it, you understand. But then Trump gets to town, and as he put in his speech, oh, gee, it's way different once you're the president and the generals tell you that they're going to blame you for everything bad that happens there if you leave. Right? He won't get blamed for everything bad that happens if he stays, but he'll get blamed for everything that happens bad there that if he leaves. The Taliban comes to town, they massacre a bunch of people when they roll into Herat province or, city or whatever, then it'll be bad PR. And so just like Barack Obama, he's made the political decision that it's easier to just stay. And so Yeah, I mean, very real people are going to continue getting killed in this thing, including, burning to death, having their body parts exploded off of them and then bleeding out, screaming for their mommy and stuff like that. Really? Like the most horrible, horrible violence you can imagine. Not like as a whataboutism, because I hate all of that, I mean, you look at this thing in Las Vegas. It's an absolute nightmare. I'm absolutely as broken up about it as everybody is. You imagine somebody doing something like that. Imagine something like that happening to someone that you put first in your life, right? It's insane, that level of violence, to do something like that to people. Yet this country does that every day. While I was watching the news out of the corner of my eye today, I was interviewing Chris Woods about the air wars in Iraq and Syria. Then I was interviewing Ron Paul about whether we're going to have a war with North Korea, which Mattis has warned would be the most bitter fighting of our lifetimes, which with him talking, I think includes the first Korean War, certainly would include Vietnam. And so this is the thing that for some reason, Americans just have so much trouble being able to understand, that it matters at all, even that these people that we're killing are real people and that they're survivors. It really matters to them a lot. They're the grandmothers of the dead babies. Their grief cannot be quantified. It's just exactly the same as if somebody killed you, how your grandmother would feel. That's exactly the same thing. And yet for Americans, this is just, forget it, Horton. Just forget it. You can't get people to realize that. Just think about how badly our country would react if the kind of violence our country inflicted on others was ever inflicted on us. Look at what happened after September 11th. It became the excuse for all this. And yet we do this to Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, Afghanistan, less in Pakistan now, but for years in Pakistan. We bomb them. We kill their grandmothers. We kill their babies. For real. In the most horrible, violent, nightmare, horror movie ways that you couldn't even, seriously. You guys know what I mean. And somebody having their body torn apart by shrapnel. Okay? And this is what we do to people all the time. And when it's our blood, we freak. But when it's theirs, we go, that's what they get for being in our way, or they're the ones who picked the fight with us, or whatever lie we got to tell ourselves to shrug it off like it doesn't matter. Like Yemen is just an ant pile that you can just kick over, and it doesn't matter whether their babies are dying of cholera, vomiting themselves to death at the hands of the USA. Doesn't matter, even, And then we're surprised when they attack us. Go, well, obviously they hate us because their stupid, evil religion makes them hate us.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable what's going on and the way so many people look at it. But thank you so much again for joining us today, Scott, and for being so generous with your time. If someone goes to foolserrand.us, what are they going to find there? And again, what are the other websites and resources online people should take a look at for your book and to follow your work?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, foolserrand.us basically is just a landing page for the book. There's a link to forward you on to Amazon.com there where you can buy it. And there's a collection of blurbs there. I got a lot of nice blurbs from Daniel Ellsberg and Ron Paul and Patrick Coburn and Anand Gopal and Eric Margulies and a lot of great guys. And including a lot of military guys, by the way, former officers and so forth. And then I've done 4,500 and something interviews since 2003, and they're all available for you there at scotthorton.org/interviews. If you want to find out about all this stuff going back, skip around a little bit, see what you can find. And my institute, it's me and Sheldon Richman and a lot of great writers there at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org. I'm the opinion editor. Sorry, this list is getting long. I'm the opinion editor of antiwar.com. That means all those viewpoints are approved by me for you every day. And you can follow me on Twitter at Scott Horton Show.
All right. Well, it's a great list. It also means that you're involved in a lot of great projects. So that's awesome to hear. We love having you on the show and hearing your take on what's going on with foreign policy. It's so awful, but what's going on, but you have a way of putting it that we just love listening to. So thanks so much for joining us. And I want to remind everybody that the show notes page for this episode is wakeupcallpodcast.com/Afghanistan. So if you can't remember everything on that list just now, well, you just have to remember one website, wakeupcallpodcast.com/Afghanistan, and we will have links to all of the resources and websites mentioned by Scott just now, as well.
One more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
You asked at foolserrand.us, what all do we have there? The maps. I couldn't publish the maps in the book, unfortunately. Otherwise, every page would have had to have been glossy white picture paper. That was the only way. Those were my options. So, unfortunately, I have these incredible maps, and then they're not in the book. They are in the Kindle version, by the way. If you get the Kindle version, you get the maps. Otherwise, if you go to foolserrand.us/maps, I've got incredibly detailed ethnic and religious maps of, one, the entire region, and then two, Afghanistan and Pakistan, that are really worth looking at. People want to check that out.
Yeah, great. And that's so important to understanding a situation like this where you have so many groups and so many ethnicities and so many different people with so many different histories and backgrounds a part of this. So again, though, the show notes page for this episode is wakeupcallpodcast.com/Afghanistan. That's going to be the place to go. And I encourage everyone while they're on our website to sign up for our email list and subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes or Stitcher or your preferred podcatcher so you can get all the episodes and get notifications and updates as they come out. And Scott, again, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss this important new book. You know, if you watch TV, you think the book you got to get is What Happened by Hillary Clinton. No. That couldn't be further from the truth. The book people have got to go get is Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan by Scott Horton. So thank you so much for joining us to talk about it today.
Thanks again, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wake Up Call podcast. If you'd like to listen to more episodes, please check out our website at wakeupcallpodcast.com.
There you will find show notes pages and comment sections dedicated to the show. You can also contact us via our website. And thanks again for listening.